I definitely don't think Dave faked his own death, Charlie said. And what if it's not him? Jessica peered carefully into the face. It's him! Charlie looked at the dried blood soaked into the mascot's fingers. The spring locks might not have killed him right away, but this is where he died. They could see Dave's body through the gaps in the costume and the wide carved eyes in the mascot's head through the face. His skin was desecrated and shriveled. His eyes were wide open, his face expressionless and discolored. Charlie moved closer again. Her initial shock had passed, and now she was curious to see more of him. She proved carefully at first, in case something of those spring locks inside might still be waiting to snap, but it was clear that they had already done their damage. The locks had been driven and deeply into the skin, and the base of each were flush against his neck. They looked like a part of him. Charlie studied the chest of the costume. There were large tears in yellow fabric, which had gone green and pink with mold in patches. She could grab the whole of the sides and pull the gap wide as she could. Jessica watched, fascinated by her hand over her mouth, and skewers of metal protrude through his entire body. Dull and crusted were his blood, but there was complex parts, twisted knots of gore, and many layers of machinery that stuck out from his body. The fabric suit was stiff with blood, too, yet the man didn't seem to have rotted, despite the year that had passed. It's like he's fused with the suit, Charlie said. She tugged at the mascot's head, trying to pull it off, but gave up quickly. The gaping eyes stared at her, behind which was the dead man's face. With the light directly on him, Dave's skin appeared sickly and discolored. Charlie felt a sudden rush of nausea. She pulled back from the corpse and looked up at Jessica. So now what? Jessica said. Do you want to give him a foot massage too? She abruptly turned her head away to gag at the joke. Listen, I have a class in, checked her watch, about an hour. Do we still have time to do some shopping? Why can't we have normal friends? We are learning all the time, hopefully. At least some of you are learning the right. Here in this class, Dr. Treadwell's students laughed nervously, ha 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 ha, but she continued over them. It apparently had not been a joke. When we learn, our minds must decide whether we store that information. Unconsciously, we determine what group of things is most relevant and, to connect it to the group. This is, of course, only the most rudimentary explanation. When computers do this, we call it an information tree. Charlie was only half listening, but she knew this already and was taking her notes on autopilot. Since there was an expedition to Freddy's the day before, she hadn't been able to get the image of Dave's body out of her head, his torso, and the gruesome lace of scars that had covered it. When he was alive, he had shown them off to her, boasting of his survival. Well, he never told her of what had happened. It must have been an accident. He used to wear those suits all the time. She could see him now, before all the murders, dressed in a yellow bunny, and dancing merrily with her and the yellow bear. She shook her head suddenly. The image... Getting rid of the image. "Are you okay?" She nodded, wheeling him off. The dead man in the field, it wasn't an accident. Someone forced him inside, but why? Charlie relentlessly tapped her fingers against the desk. "That will be all today." Dr. Treadwell set down her chalk and stalked off to the auditorium stage with a purposeful step. Her teaching assistant, a flustered graduate student, scurried forward to collect the homework. "Hey, do you have some time to go over any of this?" Artie asked Charlie as they gathered up the things. "I'm a little bit over my head in this class." Charlie paused. She noticed, she promised, to make up her first date with John, but she wasn't meeting him for over an hour. Now that she'd been to Freddy's, Charlie almost felt like she was on familiar ground, even if it was soaked in blood. "I have some time now," she told Artie, who lit up. Thanks so much. We can go over work at the library." Charlie nodded. "Sure." She followed him across the campus, only half engaged as he explained his difficulties with the material. They found a table, and Charlie opened her notebook to the pages she had taken down today, pushing them across.
"So Artie could see them. Actually, do you mind if I sit next to you?" he asked. "It's easier if we both are looking at the same thing, right?" "Oh yeah." Charlie pulled her notes back as he came round and sat next to her, scooting the metal folding chair next to hers, just a few inches closer than she would have preferred. "So, where did you get lost?" she asked him. "I was telling you on the way over," he said, with a reproach in his voice. Then he cleared his throat. I guess I understood the beginning of the lecture when she said she was reviewing the last week's material." Charlie laughed. "So basically, you want to review everything new from today?" Artie nodded sheepishly.
Charlie started from the beginning, pointing at her notes. As she went, she flipped through the pages. She noticed her own scribbles in the margins. Charlie leaned in closer, where harsh outlines of rectangles lined from the bottom page. They were all colored in like slabs of granite. She stared at them and with a sense of deja vu. They were important. "I don't remember drawing that," she thought uneasily. "It's just doodles. Everybody doodles." She turned the page to the next segment of the lecture, and a strange alertness rose at the base of her neck. If someone might be watching her, there would be more doodles in the margins of this page too, and the next one. All of them were rectangles. Some were large, some were small, some were scribbled, some outlined, and so solidly that her pen had wet the paper through and torn it. All of them were vertical, taller, and went wide. Charlie stared, tilting her head from different angles until something pined in her head. "Sammy," she thought. Then, "Is this you? Does this mean something I don't understand?" As she watched as he turned the page again, the next pages were the same. They filled with neat, clear notes, but little rectangles were squashed into every available spot on the page, stuffed into spaces between bullet points, cramped into the margins, and tucked away where lines came up short. Quickly, Artie flipped the page back. He looked up at her and smiled, but his eyes were wary. Why don't you try the first problem here? Charlie suggested. Artie bent over his worksheet and Charlie stared down at her notebook. Her mind kept turning to her father. She clenched her teeth and started to spot the vultures were circling. As she got closer, the birds on the ground flapped their wings at the sight of her soared away. Charlie dropped to her knees. It was a woman. Charlie's eyes went first to her clothing. It was ripped up, just like the dead man Kleberg had shown her. She leaned over to check the woman's neck, though she knew what she would find. They were deep, ugly gouges from the spring locks of the animatronic suit. But before she could examine them closely, Charlie stopped, horrified. She looks just like me. The woman's face was bruised and scratched with she obscured her features. Charlie shook her head. It's easier to imagine more of a resemblance than there was. But her hair was brown and cut like Charlie's, and her face was round shape with the same complexion. Her features were different, but not that different. Charlie stood up and took a deliberate step back from the woman, suddenly aware of how exposed she was in the open field. Clay! I need to call Clay! She looked up at the sky, wishing for a way to keep the vultures at bay, to protect the body. I'm sorry, she whispered to the dead woman. I'll be back. Charlie started off her car, then she broke into a run fast and faster across the field until she ran like something was right behind her. She got in and slammed the car, locking it as soon as she was inside, panting heavily. Charlie thought for a second she was about halfway between a hurricane and the school, but there was a gas station just down the road where she could call Clay. With a last glance at the spot where the body lay, Charlie pulled out onto the road. The gas station seemed a little bit empty. As she arrived, Charlie realized she had never actually seen anyone fueling up here. Is this gas station working? The place is old and shabby, which she had noticed in passing, but never stopped to look around. The pumps looked functional, but not new, and there was no shelter above them. They simply stood on concrete blocks in the middle of the gravel driveway. Exposed to the weather, the little building attached to the station might have been painted white once, but the paint had worn down and revealed grey boards underneath. It seemed to be tilting slightly, slipping on its foundation. There was a window, but it was filthy. Almost the same color grey as the building outside the walls. Charlie hesitated, but went to knock on the door. A young man answered, about Charlie's age, wearing a St. John's College t-shirt and jeans. Yeah, he said, giving her a blank stare. Are you open? Yeah. He was chewing on gum and wiped his hands on a grimy rag. Charlie took a deep breath. I really need to use your phone. The boy opened the door and let her in. There was more space inside, she thought. There we go. In addition to the counter, there was a convenience store, though most of the shelves were empty and the line of refrigerators at the back was dark. The young man was looking at Charlie expectantly. Can I use your phone? She asked again. The phone's for customers only. Okay. Charlie glanced back at the car. I'll get the gas on the way out. Pump's broken. Maybe you want something out of the cooler, he said. Not at the grimy freezer with a sliding glass top and faced a patch of red paint that must have once been a logo. We've got popsicles. I don't want... Fine, I'll take a popsicle, he said, picking out one. Oh, sorry. Accidental fuck up again. Pick out anyone you want. I leaned into the cooler. Pale, glassy eyes stared back at her. Beneath them was a fuzzy red muzzle, its mouth open and poised to snap. Charlie screamed and hurled backwards, banging into the shelf behind her. Several counts fell. The shelf rolled across the floor. Off. Sorry. Missed that word, apparently. My ass got a little blind there. The sound echoed in the empty space. What is that? What's that? Johnny yelled. The boy cackled so hard he was grasping for breath. Peering back inside, Charlie realized someone had placed a taxidermic animal in the cooler, maybe a coyote. That was great, he finally managed to say. Charlie drew herself up, shaking with rage. I would like to use your phone now, she said coldly. The boy beckoned her to the counter, all smiles, and handed her the rotary phone. No long distance, though, he warned. Charlie turned her back and dialed, walking towards the cooler as the phone rang. She peered in the top of the studying the stuffed canine from a high angle. Claybrook here. Clay, it's Charlie. Listen, I need you to meet me. It's another... She glanced at the young man behind the counter, who was watching her intently, not trying to hide the fact that he was listening. It's like the thing you showed me before, with the cows. What? Charlie? Where are you? I'm at the gas station, a few miles away from you. Looks like someone's painted an outhouse. Hey? The boy behind straightened up for a moment. Right, I know where you at. I'll be right there. There was a click from the other end. Thanks for the phone, said begrudgingly, and left without waiting for a reply. Charlie crouched again where the woman's body lay. She looked anxiously up from the road from Clay's car, but it didn't appear. For, not from. At least the vultures hadn't returned. I just stay in the car until he gets here, she thought. Charlie didn't move from her spot. This woman had died horribly and had been abandoned in a field. Now at least she didn't have to be alone. The more Charlie looked at her, the harder it was to dismiss the resemblance. Charlie shivered. Even though the sun was warm on her back, she was still feeling cold, crawling with dread. Charlie? Charlie spun around to see Clay, and sighed and shook her head. Sorry, I got here as fast as I could, he said lightly. She smiled. It's okay. I'm just on edge today. I think that it's my third time I've jumped in the air when someone said my name. Clay wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on the body. He knelt carefully beside it, scrutinizing it. Charlie could almost see him, feeling every detail away. She held her breath, not wanting to disturb him. "Did you touch the body?" he asked sharply, not looking away from the corpse. "Yes," she admitted. "I checked to see if she had the same injuries as the man." "Did she?" "Yes, I think I know she was killed the same way." Clay nodded. Charlie watched as he got up and circled the woman, dropping down to look at her more closely, at her head and again at her feet. Finally, he turned his attention to Charlie again. "How did you find her?" he asked. "I saw birds, vultures, circling above the head. I went back to check." "Why did you go to check?" And Charlie felt a trickle of fear. Surely Clay didn't suspect her. Why would he, she thought. Who else would know to use spring locks? I bet he could come up with a million theories about me. Twisted girl avenges her father's death out of psychodrama. Film at 11? She took a deep breath, meeting Clay's eyes. Voice steady as she could, she noticed. Clay nodded, the steely expression slipping from his face, replaced by worry. "Charlie, this girl looks like you," he said bluntly. "Not that much like me. She could be your twin." "No, she looks nothing like my twin." Clay gave her a puzzled look, then comprehension dawned. "I'm sorry. You had a twin, didn't you? Your brother. I barely remember him." "That's why all I do is remember him. I know she looks like me. We're right near a college town. She's a young white female with brown hair. You're not a rare type, Charlie. No offense." "Do you think it's a coincidence?" Clay didn't look at her. "There was another body found this morning. Another girl? Yes, as a matter of fact, been dead for a couple of days. Probably killed 2 nights ago." Charlie looked down at him in alarm. "Does that mean this is going to keep happening? Unless we can think of a way to stop it," he said. Charlie nodded. "I can help." She looked again at the woman's face. "She's nothing like me. Let's go to her house," she abruptly added, seized by a sudden impulse to prove it, to gather evidence that she and the victim were not the same. "What? Her house?" Giving her a dubious look. "You asked me to help," Charlie said. "Let me help." Clay didn't answer. Instead, he reached the woman's pockets, one by one, searching for her wallet. He had to move the body to do it, and she jerked a little as he did, like a ghastly puppet. Charlie waited, and at last he came with her wallet. He landed Charlie... Landed? Her hand... handed Charlie her driving license. "Tracy Horton," she read. "She doesn't look like a Tracy. You got the address?" Clay scanned the road for police cars. Charlie read it quickly and handed the license back. I'm going to give you 20 minutes before I radio this in, he told her. Use it. Tracy Horton had lived in a small house off a back road. Her nearest neighbors' houses were visible, but Charlie couldn't imagine they would have heard her scream if she'd managed to scream at all. There was a blue car in the driveway, but Tracy had been taken from her home since presumably she had just been wandering through that field. It could have easily have been hers. Charlie pulled in behind the car and went to the front door. She knocked, wondering what she was going to do if someone answered. I really should have thought this through. She couldn't be the one to inform a parent, a spouse, a sibling of the young woman's death. Why did I have to assume that she'd lived alone? No one answered. Charlie tried again, and when there was still no response, she tried the door. It was unlocked. Charlie walked quietly through the home, not sure what she was looking for. She glanced at the watch. 10 of 20 minutes had passed. Just driving here, and she had to assume that the police would get here faster than she did. Why did I follow the speed limit the whole way here? The living room and the kitchen were clean, but they conveyed no information to her. Charlie didn't know what peach-painted walls said about a person, or the fact that there were 3 dining room chairs instead of 4. There were 2 bedrooms. One had sterile air of a guest room that was slowly being taken over by storage. The bed was made, and the clean towels were folded on the chest drawers, but cardboard boxes filled a quarter of the room. The other bedroom looked lived in. The walls were green, the bedspread pale blue, and piles of clothing on the floor. Charlie stood in the doorway for a moment, and she could not go inside. I don't even know what I'm looking for. This woman's life would be sifted through to the last grain by trained investigators. Her diary would be read, if she had one. Her secrets would be revealed, if she had any. Charlie didn't need to be a part of it. She turned and walked quickly but quietly back to the front of the house, almost running down the steps, standing by the car. She checked her watch again. 6 minutes before Clay called in the body. Charlie went to the little blue car and peeled inside the house. It was neat. There was dry cleaning hanging in the back window and empty soda in the cup holder. She walked all around it, looking for something. Mud in tires, scratches and paint, but there was nothing unusual. 5 minutes? She walked briskly through unkempt grass and bordered the sides of the house. When she reached the backyard, she stopped dead before there were 3 huge holes in the ground, longer than they were wide. They looked like graves, but the second one was glance they were too messy, their outlines poorly defined. Charlie walked around them in a circle. They were lined up to one another. They were shallow, but the dirt at the bottom was loose. Charlie grabbed a stick off the ground and poked into the middle of the hole. Went almost a foot before it was stopped by denser soil. The dirt dug out was truly messy all around. had carelessly tossed it everywhere, not bothering to pile it up. 2 minutes! Charlie hesitated for another moment before she then lowered herself into the middle hole. Her feet sunk into the loose dirt. She thought to steady herself, catching her balance. It wasn't too deep. The walls came up to her waist. She knelt and put her palm against the wall of the grave. The hole, she reminded herself. The dirt was loose here, too, and the wall was rough. Something had been hidden here, under the ground. The air is growing thin. I'm running out of oxygen, and I will die like this, alone in the dark. Charlie's throat seized. She felt as if she couldn't breathe. She climbed out of the hole and up onto the grass of Tracy Horton's backyard. Charlie took a deep breath, focusing all of her attention on pushing away the panic. When she was 3 of it, she checked her watch. -1 minute. He's already called them, but something kept her there. Something familiar. That loose dirt. Charlie's mind raced. Something climbed out of these. From a distance, the siren was wailing. It would be here in no time. Charlie hurried to the car and pulled out of the driveway, taking the first corner without caring where it would take her. The whole stayed in her mind, the image like a stain. Charlie slowed her car, with the cops in the hurricane converging on the area. Now the time to be stopped. Now was not the time to be stopped for speeding. She was grubby with the dirt from the dead woman's backyard and had a nagging feeling there was something she was forgetting about. John! She realized she was supposed to meet him. She was supposed to check on the clock on the dashboard almost 2 hours ago. Her heart sank. He'll think I stood him up. No, he'll think I'm dead, she amended. Given the perilous history of their relationship, he probably think the second was more likely. When she got to the restaurant where they had planned to meet, a small Italian place across town, Charlie ran in from the parking lot at full speeds. She skidded to a stop in front of the teenage hostess, who greeted her with a flustered look. "Can I help you?" she asked Charlie. Taking a step back, Charlie caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror behind the hostess on the counter. There were streaks of dirt on her face and clothes she hadn't thought to clean up first. She quickly wiped her cheeks with her hands before answering the girl. "I'm supposed to meet someone, a tall guy, brown hair, kind of, She gestured vaguely to the top of her head, attempting to indicate the habitual chaos of John's hair, but the hostess looked at her blankly. Charlie bit her lip in frustration. He must have left. Of course he left. You're 2 hours late. Charlie, a voice rang out. "John, you're still here!" she cried too loudly for the quiet restaurant as he appeared behind the hostess, looking profoundly relieved. "I figured I might as well eat while I'm here." He swallowed what was in his mouth and laughed. "Are you okay?" "I thought you might not be coming." "I'm fine. Where are you sitting? Or are you still sitting? Well, I mean, you're not obviously sitting, you're standing. But I mean, before you were standing where you're sitting." Charlie ran her fingers in her hair and clenched her fists against her scalp, trying to reassemble her thoughts. She mumbled an apology to the room, not sure who it was for. John glanced around nervously, then gestured towards a table near the kitchen. There was mostly an empty plate with a half-eaten breadstick resting on it, a cup of coffee, and a second place setting untouched. He sat down and he looked at her appraisingly. Then John leaned across the table and asked in a low voice, Charlie, what happened? You wouldn't believe me if I told you. His face remained concerned. You're filthy. Did you fall down in the parking lot? Yes, I fell in the parking lot and rolled down a hill into a dumpster and then fell out the dumpster and then tripped in the way. Happy? Stop looking at me like that. Like what? Like you have the right to disapprove of me. John pulled back in his chair, his eyes wide. He blinked hard and Charlie sighed. John, I'm sorry. I'll tell you everything. I just need some time. Some time to collect my thoughts and clean up. She laughed in an exhausted, shaken sound, then buried her face in her hands. John leaned back and signaled for the waitress to bring the check. Breathing heavily, Charlie looked around the restaurant. It was almost empty. The hostess and the other waitresses talking together near the door with no apparent interest in anything their customers were doing. There was a family of 4 by the front window. The children just barely out of toddlerhood. One kept sliding out of its chair, and the other onto the floor every time the mother turned her attention away. The other girl was a girl happily drawing on the tablecloth with markers. No one seemed to care what was going on, but the emptiness made Charlie feel exposed. I'm going to go clean up, she said. Bathroom? Young pointed. Charlie got up and left the table just as the waitress arrived to deliver his ticket. There was a payphone in the hallway, and Charlie stopped at it wavering. She craned her neck to see if John was watching, but from where she stood, she could only see a tiny corner of the table. Quickly, she called Clay Burke's office. To her surprise, he answered. You saw her backyard, he said. It wasn't a question. To her surprise, he asked, oh yeah, sorry. Can you give me the other address? There could be a pattern, something. There sure could, he said dryly. That's why I raced back to the station instead of sticking around to measure the holes. You got a pen? Hang on. The hostess was briefly absent from the station, and Charlie dropped the phone, letting it swing on its metal cord. She hurried to the podium and snatched the pen and a takeout menu. Clay, go ahead. He recited the names and addresses, and she scribbles them dutifully in the margins of the menu. Thanks, she says, when he has done, and hung up without waiting for him to respond. She folded the menu and slipped into her back pocket. In the bathroom, Charlie washed off as much dirt as she could. She couldn't clean her clothing, but at least her face was rubbed, and her hair was rearranged a little more neatly. As she moved to exit the bathroom, an image flashed unbidden through her thoughts. It was a face of the dead woman. She could be your twin, she heard Clay say in a low, authoritative voice. Charlie shook her head. It's a coincidence, right? How many brown-haired, college-age women are around here? The first victim was a man. It doesn't mean anything. She grabbed the doorknob to leave, but frozen. It was like in the library. Charlie released the knob, and it spun back into position, releasing a horrible creak as it moved. The costume had been disturbed. The creaking noise was faint and careful. She scarcely even heard it. Charlie looked up from her game, and there was a figure in the door. Charlie glanced wildly around the room, pulling herself back to the present. With a swell of panic, Charlie pulled on the bathroom door, but it had somehow sealed shut. She mouthed the words, but no sound came. I know you're there. I'm trying to get you. I have to get inside, she screamed. The door burst open. Charlie fell into John's arms. Charlie! She collapsed to her knees. She looked up to see the scattered handful of customers all staring at her. John glanced into the bathroom behind her, then quickly turned his attention back to Charlie, helping her to her feet. I'm okay. I'm fine. She shook loose of his hands. I'm fine. The door stuck. I felt hot. Charlie fanned her face, trying to make a sensible story of it. Come on. Let's get to the car. He tried to take her arm again, but she shook free. I'm fine. She dug her keys into her pocket and walked straight for the door, not wanting an old woman was openly staring at Charlie, her fork suspended in the air. Charlie returned to her stare. Food poisoning, Charlie said plainly. The woman's face went pale, and Charlie walked out the door. When they got out to her car, John sat down in the passenger seat and looked at Charlie expectantly. You're sure you're okay? It's been a rough day, that's all. I'm sorry. What happened? Tell him what happened, Charlie thought. I want to go to my dad's my old house, she insisted, surprising herself. Be honest, her inner voice said sharply. Know what kind of creature is doing this? You know who built it. Stay focused. Right, he said, his voice softening. You haven't seen it since the storm, she nodded. He thinks I want to see the damage. She'd forgotten about the storm until now, but the sudden kindness in John's voice made her nervous. Is there anything left? She imagined the house razed to the ground and felt sudden wrongness, like a part of her had been ripped away. She'd never thought of the house as anything but a house, but now, as she drove towards what was left of it, she felt a painful knot in her stomach. It was where all her clearest memories of her father were kept, his rough hands building her toys, showing her his new creations in the workshop, and holding her close when she was afraid. They lived together, just the two of them, and it was a place where he had finally died. Charlie felt as if the joy and sorrow, the love and the anguish of all the two lifetimes had poured off into the very bones of the old house. The idea of it being wrecked by the storm was an utter violation. She shook her head and gripped the wheel tighter, suddenly aware of how angry she was. Her love of the house, even of her father, could never be simple. They had both betrayed her, but now there was a new monster out there. She clenched her jaw, trying to fight the tears that welled up in her eyes. Dad, what did you do?